Hey, Creep Cult, welcome to your weekly Patreon bonus episode. We are continuing with the alphabet roulette, and for our C movie, we are talking about CHUD. Cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers.
Or so we think.
Or there's one more extra thing.
So I didn't remember that I was like, did I see this movie or had I not seen this movie? And I did my classic check the letterbox to see if I had rated it.
Whole personality.
I looked and I had given it 1.5 stars.
Aww.
And I was like, fuck, this is not going to be fun. a third week of bad movies. But like a lot of movies that I watched like in that intense year of the beginning of the pandemic, they're kind of a blur. And so I was actually excited to rewatch this because I felt like I might get a little bit more out of it. And to sweeten the deal, I listened to a commentary with the director, the actor who plays Bosch, Christopher Curry, Daniel Stern, and John Hurd.
All three of which are in Home Alone movies. Obviously, Hurd and Stern are in the first two.
Oddly enough, they're in those movies together, but never share any scenes.
Yeah. And then Curry is like the FBI agent from Home Alone 3.
Oh,
it's
really?
Like, Alex, where'd you get this chip or whatever?
I guess for Curry, this was his first movie, and he spends most of the commentary just making fun of himself and how bad he is in the movie. And they pretty much all it's a hilarious commentary. I'd recommend it's on YouTube if you want to sync it up with the movie. But I mean, Daniel Stern and John Hurd are hilarious.
So those are the stars. We got Douglas Cheek directing, Parnell Hall writing, and a story by Shepard Abbott.
Yeah, so if the explanation of the acronym doesn't already tell you what the plot is, basically people start vanishing in New York City.
I feel like this movie would have been rad if we hadn't known what was going on. Like if we didn't know what CHUD stood for, and we didn't know that it was about these creatures under the sewers.
I think to be fair, though, obviously we're going to spoil this movie by the end of this conversation, but as we get further along, we kind of find out that while they are doing, nefarious things, they're more of the victim than the actual villain of the movie. We find out who the actual villain of the movie is by the end.
Right, and so I liked that mystery, and I was like, this movie would be pretty cool, and it's kind of like a thriller to start off, and I was like, this is not at all what I expected. I thought it was going to be a lot more of these things coming out.
Like you have this the build up in the beginning. I was like, exactly. I was like, this feels a lot more like an actual movie than I remembered it feeling like. And honestly, I think that there's a version of this movie that would have potentially played better for like just general audiences and not necessarily like
general audiences,
cult horror audiences, because according to the commentary, the original idea for the CHUDs was not for them to be like, creature feature clawed monsters. They were just going to be like slightly mutated homeless people who had kind of like gone potentially crazy, and it was going to be.
They almost kind of set that up with like the opening scenes of like seeing just kind of like people just kind of like like zombily stalking the streets of New York.
Yeah, and then a couple of the homeless people you see that have been like CHUD infected, like in early stages. Basically, they were like, "That's what the CHUDs were supposed to look like," and then the studio was like, "No, people aren't going to come see the movie unless there's like monsters in it." So then they had to do, the monsters. But yeah, the way this is set up, you have this photographer who kind of stumbles into this whole potential conspiracy, and he's trying to get to the bottom of this whole thing. And then you have Daniel Stern's character, who's like
runs a soup kitchen.
Yeah, he runs a soup kitchen, and so he's like on the ground level and the underground level, like interacting with these homeless people, and he has a personal connection with them disappearing, and he's like trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, and he's kind of leaning into the whole, it's CHUDs and it stands for this, and it's this whole conspiracy, man. And so yeah, it does build a good amount of tension. It's just that it feels like it never really goes anywhere particularly interesting. Like it just plays out like by a point, it just plays out like a typical low rent creature feature.
Yeah, the punch of like it's CHUD. I don't know, is that plural? But there's not really that punch. It's just kind of like we get this big attack, and then most of it is them trying to run out of the sewer. But then on the surface level, it's just people blocking sewers, and so there's not really like a huge payout. We get a few attacks here and there, but for the most part, it's just kind of like we handled it. They're in the sewers, they're dead by gas.
I think that the like I said, the fact that the CHUD really aren't the primary antagonist of this, it's actually like the government.
Right.
I mean, it's
else
nothing.
is new, right?
It's nothing novel. It's nothing like, I mean, it's literally just bar for bar Jaws. I mean, because that's how Jaws is. Like, Bruce the Shark is not the villain of Jaws. He is.
The mayor is.
Yeah, the mayor is the villain.
Yeah.
But you get that fucking final scene with the shark that's like hell. You know what I mean?
You kind of get the cool one in the apartment where she fucking yoinks that dude's head right off.
Yeah, it grows longer just so she can cut it off easily. I was like, that guy just get a boner?
A neck boner.
Yeah, so I think it had potential, and like you were saying, it would have been nice if if it had played like a mystery, but it would have had to have been called something other than CHUD, obviously. And my thought at first was, oh, maybe the studio was like, oh, you have to call it CHUD or whatever. But apparently, the entire idea spawned from the word CHUD. So,
oh shit,
yeah. So the writer or the director. So this had one writer. And then they replaced the writer, and then Daniel Stern and Curry and all of them hated that writer, so they were like, get the fuck out, and basically ended up writing all of their dialogue and like characters basically on set. And so during the commentary they were basically like, yeah, I wrote this, I did this.
That's cool.
And like made this up. But the guy who came up with the CHUD idea, he was just drunk one day and was just like, CHUD, that's a fun word. And then had to, I guess, reverse engineer what CHUD would stand for, and that spawned the whole idea for this movie. And so, yeah, it was always going to be CHUD. And it is fun to say. And I think that's part of its staying power, too, I think, is that CHUD and then explaining what it means is part of the fun of talking about CHUD.
So what's the second definition, or I guess the original definition? It's like
contamination, hazard, urban
disposal.
Yeah. Which, again, would have played as a cool reveal if we didn't, like, if the movie wasn't always called CHUD. And then also if I kind of like the idea that Daniel Stern or whoever like kind of just came up with their own interpretation of what CHUD would mean, because they maybe just like saw it on one of the barrels or whatever and was like, that must mean cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers or whatever, because that's what they are. But yeah, the CHUDs themselves never get particularly interesting. You get little glimpses of like them underground doing maybe some sort of like churchy type religious thing, and it kind of implies that there's some sort of society down here.
And they also kind of look like cheap Power Rangers villains.
Yeah, and they're just covered in KY jelly. One of the guys on the commentary said that since this came out at the same time as Ghostbusters, this and Ghostbusters legitimately sold out all of the KY jelly in New York basically to make these movies. But they wanted to do everything bigger. I think budget is also just a constraint with this, because they were talking about how they wanted to have like a whole weird like reverse New York type setup underground, where like they had built this whole society, which kind of I feel like connects to what we're talking about in our main episode, Thunderdome, because there's this whole underground, the underworld or whatever society. But the only pigs here are the motherfucking cops.
Yeah, so it had a budget of 1.25 mil and made 4.7. So still profit. Not a huge profit, but it still made a couple mil.
It also has a pretty sizable cult following and like the B movie schlocky creature feature type territory, and then obviously with people like Jordan Peele talking about its mass appeal in creating kind of the storylines for his stories. I think it adds a lot of credence that there's value in this movie, and like I said, while some of the tropes are a little tired, they wouldn't have been as tired in the 80s.
Yeah.
There are a few moments of pretty good gore. I like the moment when
the bandage on the leg.
Yeah, when he pulls the bandage and you see the legs all like eaten away and shit, and there's like a couple just like dismembered people in the sewers, and so there's a little bit of good gore. I just think that either the story of this needed to be more compelling to make this fully work, or the creature designs and the creature stuff needed to be more interesting and crazier to really like put this to the next level. And instead it's kind of like, I didn't hate it, didn't love it, it was fine. Better than the 1.5 that I had given it. I'd say it's maybe like a 2.5 now if I had to rate it, but I was glad I rewatched it. I wasn't necessarily bored. I will say I did nap for a little bit right in the middle, just for a tiny bit.
I do think that Stern and Hurd are both fun in this movie. Their performances aren't bad.
Mm-hmm.
They're entertaining to watch as kind of like your two like dueling leads.
Yeah, they joked that the whole thing was actually a love story between those two characters. And then when they're underground at the end and they're like fighting around on the ground, it's actually Stern trying to convince Hurd that they can be gay together above ground too. It's not just okay down here. It's also okay up there. But yeah, I mean,
it plays itself pretty seriously at the beginning for a while, which I was not expecting, because you go into something like CHUD, yeah, and knowing what it ultimately is, I was like, this is kind of like a straightforward movie, way more than I was expecting. I thought there was going to be a lot more comedic bits, like intentionally comedic bits.
Well, and that's what I was saying about, like, I feel like the title is a large part of why this movie has had the staying power that it does, because if it had just been called something like The Sewer or Mutants or something like that, nobody would give a shit. This would have disappeared a long time ago with the million other, boringly titled, boringly made creature features and blockbuster and
Search
stuff.
of Darkness 3.
Yeah. And I really do think that CHUD being so fun to say and being such a little earworm, you're like, I got to check out what CHUD is. Yeah. And especially having it be an abbreviation, it's like, well, I got to find out what that means, man. And guess what? You get 2 meanings.
That surprised
more
me.
bang for your buck.
Oh, shit.
God
Not
damn.
Cannibals, the Cupid Underground Dwellers.
One thing I would have liked to see that apparently was cut from the movie is that Daniel Stern at the end, when he runs over to the one guy, like after the truck explodes, he was supposed to kind of do like a thriller type turn to the camera with his eyes glowing, and you're supposed to find out that he had been exposed enough to start becoming a CHUD.
CHUD.
Yeah.
He's chudding.
So I think that would have been a cool little stinger for the end of the movie. But overall, I mean, if you haven't seen CHUD, I do think that it's worth watching if you're a fan of creature features and you're a fan of this idea and you like what we've said so far. I mean, really, I think it's a difficult movie to spoil because nothing crazy happens. Yeah. It's pretty straightforward. Like,
there's cannibalistic human.
There's monsters underground. These people have to go try to survive the monsters underground. That's the movie. So
yeah, there's a sequel called CHUD 2, Bud the CHUD, and there's been talks about remaking and rebooting for years, but it never seems to happen. There is a movie that came out recently that's found footage called Dwellers.
I heard about this. Yeah, I haven't seen it though.
Very much like a rip on
like
this.
a spiritual successor kind of thing.
It's a no budget film. It's on. What did I see it on?
Spirit
I think
Box,
it's
probably.
on
Screenbox.
Screenbox.
Prime. I think it's on Prime.
Prime.
I mean, fair.
I read that like a large part of this was potentially inspired by an old Amazing Stories, like the pulp sci-fi magazine. There was this guy who all throughout the 50s had these stories published about how he had found out about an actual like secret conspiracy of underground people who were like running the government and stuff.
Conspiracy, man.
Yeah, it wasn't in New York, right? It was like in Michigan or something.
Yeah, and so it was super popular because they were published as like, this is a true story, and he was talking all about how like they kidnapped people and used the women for food and breeding and all this crazy shit that at the time 50s people were like, oh my god, this is the most disturbing thing ever, and it's real, and got a bunch of people calling in saying like, yeah, I've heard about this and I know about this and all that. And basically,
liars, dude.
Yeah.
Well, basically, in hindsight, most people agree that this guy was a paranoid schizophrenic, and that really the publisher was kind of just taking advantage of the ramblings. But one interesting little connection to other things that we've talked about is that he talked about these underground people having spaceships, and some of the illustrations for those spaceships are saucer shaped, and these showed up as probably the earliest like flying saucers and they would have been on these magazine covers right before the big like 50s boom of flying saucer sightings. And so there are some theories that people seeing these magazines on stands, it would have subliminally got them to be more willing to see flying saucers.
Like the creator of
potentially could have been like one of the creators of the flying saucer phenomena.
That's cool.
But I actually watched some videos recently on YouTube that were really interesting. There is a community of people in New York, and I'm sure other cities, but in New York it's a big thing, of people who do live underground in New York or in abandoned subway tunnels. They're obviously not mutant cannibals. The ones I watched, they seem to be pretty nice people who just found that this was the way that they wanted to live their lives. And so this one guy had you go into this tunnel and go climb up this ladder, and he had this whole like concrete area that he had decked out. He had, gotten some wires and sent power up to it and had a whole setup with a computer and a TV and all.
Wow.
And he was basically like, yeah, I had some like rough experiences when I was younger. My brother and I ended up wandering into these tunnels, and there used to be like a whole community of people that lived here. And eventually, when they wanted to get a train running through again, they evacuated everybody, but they missed some people. So there are still like these straggling people who have spent the last 30 years living in tunnels and underground in New York.
That's wild.
Pretty crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It's going to be the way of the future. I think we're all going to have to start going underground soon because we can only get so tall. And we're running out of space.
Yeah, that's the main problem, right, with the world?
What?
We're all getting too tall.
I think he means like buildings.
Buildings.
Oh, the buildings are getting too tall?
Yeah.
I thought you were saying just people are getting a lot taller, because that's also true.
The Swedes.
But yeah, CHUD. I don't know if this compels me to go check out the sequel, but maybe at some point when I'm bored, I'll go see what Bud the CHUD's all about. But in the
Overall,
meantime...
good time, yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
I enjoyed it. I think that if you're a fan of, like Anthony said, creature features and B movies, this is pretty much right up your alley.
It's actually a C movie.
had
It's in the C category.
easy enough time not thinking about Daniel Stern as one of the fucking wet bands.
It helps that he's younger and
he doesn't
playing
have
a
that
very...
like, too squeaky of a voice yet.
Mhm.
Oh, and we get a cameo from
fucking John Goodman.
I was
Yeah.
like, is it John Goodman?
Yeah.
He had a fucking
I
little
think it's
sleeves
his-
bag.
I think it's his very first performance on film.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, nuts, because as soon as he showed up, I just had a huge smile on my face, even though he doesn't really like do anything.
Yeah.
He's just
John
there to die.
Goodman-y in the movie. I was just like, it always makes me happy to see him,
Yeah. Anyway.
unless it's 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yeah. Still happy to see him.
Fair.
He knocks that out.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to get started with the D's.
Let's get
John,
that D.
You picked?
I picked Dead Ringers.
Ooh, I picked Dark City, and Anthony's got
Dread.
yeah.
All right,
Judge
I
Dredd.
did a little research on the wheel, gave us a little bit of additional spacing. Plus, we also have a spin again, Michael Finnegan.
Yeah. That's all you need, baby. All right.
All right, spin that wheel.
Spin that wheel. Dark City, Dark City.
D-R-E-double-D.
Wow. Come on. Do I know how to pick them or what? This is actually supposed to be a pretty good movie, right?
It is good, and also has a connection to CHUD, because there's a whole plot in it about like subjugated undergroundish sort of people. But it's a tight movie.
Yeah.
I watched it recently, so admittedly, I probably just gives me one less movie to watch watch this week, so I'm not mad about it. But I'm very excited to talk with you guys about it because it's pretty dope.
Yeah, this is actually one of my shameful misses. So we can.
It's the only other good movie that the director of The Crow made, so enjoy it.
Interessante.
You know anything about it? I don't know anything about
I know it is a very popular film.
it. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited. All right. Well, that's what we're watching next week. We're going to check out Dark City. So watch that and then tune back in. And in the meantime, check out our regular episode where we are talking about Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
But for now, we'll see you later. Because it's the C episode
Thanks
of the
for
Alphabet Roulette.
checking it out.
Yeah. All right.
Send them off, John.
Keep it creepy.